What if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side? Emma Carter sat alone in her small apartment in downtown Columbus, Ohio, the city lights flickering faintly through the window as the hum of distant traffic seeped into the quiet room. Her laptop glowed softly on the desk, the blue light casting sharp shadows across her tired face. For years, Emma had chased success with relentless drive, working late into the night on biotech projects she hoped would change the world. She had imagined a future filled with purpose, recognition, and progress, but now, as she scrolled aimlessly through social media feeds, she felt none of that. Instead, a creeping emptiness settled deep inside her chest, a heavy weight that no amount of achievement could lift. The pressure to innovate, to constantly push the boundaries of science, had become suffocating. Emma felt disconnected, from her work, from the people she loved, and even from herself. She rubbed her temples and sighed, wondering if this was what burnout truly felt like. A sudden video notification interrupted her thoughts. The thumbnail showed an elderly man with kind eyes and a gentle smile. The title read, "Japan's oldest doctor shares the secret to living past 100. Curious, Emma clicked. The screen flickered to life, and Dr. Takashi Mori, a man of 105 years, appeared. His face was lined with the marks of time, but his eyes sparkled with wisdom and warmth. The secret to a long life, he said softly, is not found in complicated medicine or expensive treatments. It lies in the simple choices we make every day, especially what we eat." Images followed, bowls of steaming miso soup, bright green tea leaves unfurling in hot water, sticky natto beans fermented just so, and sheets of dark seaweed glistening with freshness. The video felt like a window into a different world, one where life was slower, calmer, and filled with meaning. Emma leaned forward, captivated. She wasn't just hungry for food, she was hungry for hope. For a sign that there was more to life than deadlines and data. The doctor's voice continued, "When I was young, my family taught me to respect the earth and its gifts. To nourish not just the body, but the spirit." Emma's fingers hovered over the keyboard. The video ended with a prompt, "Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning." What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Her mind raced. What was the thing that pushed her forward? The answer came slowly, like a whisper. Hope. Resilience. The memory of her grandmother's soft hands in hers, the smell of fresh-baked bread in a warm kitchen on a chilly Ohio morning. Emma typed, "Ohio. Hope." She hit send and sat back, feeling a strange mix of vulnerability and strength. Maybe this was the beginning of something new. The night stretched on, and Emma couldn't shake the feeling that this chance encounter with Dr. Mori's words was no accident. Her life had become a constant rush, filled with stress and loneliness. Could the answer to living well, and maybe even living long, be simpler than she thought? The next morning, Emma woke early, a new determination stirring inside her. She pulled out a worn notebook, the pages filled with notes from her research, and began to jot down what she had learned from the video: fermented foods to support gut health, antioxidants from green tea, the importance of balance and mindfulness in daily life. It wasn't just diet, it was a philosophy. As she prepared her first bowl of miso soup, following the recipe Dr. Mori had shared, she felt a sense of calm she hadn't experienced in months. Each spoonful warmed her from the inside out, like a small act of kindness toward herself. Over the following days, Emma immersed herself in the world of traditional Japanese health practices. She read about the culture's deep respect for aging, the community's support for elders, and the way food was intertwined with identity and purpose. This wasn't just nutrition, it was a way of living with gratitude and intention. Yet, beneath the hope, Emma's doubts lingered. Could these ancient habits really help her? Was it too late to change? The stress of her career tugged at her resolve. Emails piled up. Meetings beckoned. Mark, her boyfriend, sent a message asking if she wanted to talk, sensing her growing withdrawal. Emma's heart ached with guilt. She wanted to reach out, to bridge the gap she had let grow, but exhaustion held her back. Still, something had shifted. For the first time in a long time, Emma was listening, not just to science, but to herself. She realized that living well wasn't just about breakthroughs in the lab. It was about balance, connection, and learning from the wisdom of those who had walked the path before her. Inspired, Emma made a decision. She would take a leave of absence from work and travel to Japan to meet Dr. Mori. To see for herself the world that had nurtured this remarkable man for over a century. Mark was surprised when she told him, but supportive. "If this is what you need, I'm behind you," he said, though Emma could hear the worry beneath his words. The prospect of traveling alone felt both terrifying and thrilling. Emma packed lightly, carrying with her the hopes and fears of a woman at a crossroads. Stepping off the plane in Japan, she was struck by the contrast to her busy life back home. The air was crisp, the streets quieter, the pace slower. She felt like she had entered a different time, one where every moment was savored. Meeting Dr. Mori was even more profound than she imagined. Despite his age, his presence was strong and steady, like a tree rooted deeply in the earth. His voice was soft but carried the weight of decades of experience and compassion. "To live long is to live well," he told her. "Not just in body, but in heart and mind." Emma spent days learning from him, about food, about community, about the power of patience and kindness. She tasted natto for the first time, the sticky fermented beans challenging her palate but warming her spirit. She sipped green tea in the early morning silence and walked through moss-covered gardens that seemed to whisper secrets of resilience. Each experience peeled back layers of her stress and self-doubt. But life wasn't without its challenges. A misstep on a rocky path during a hike left Emma with a twisted ankle, forcing her to slow down and confront her own impatience. Dr. Mori's gentle guidance helped her see that healing was part of the journey, not a detour from it. With renewed energy, Emma began to envision a future that blended science and tradition, innovation and respect for the past. She imagined working with Elon Musk, who had recently announced his interest in longevity research inspired by stories like Dr. Mori's. Could she be the bridge between the ancient and the modern? As her journey continued, Emma's story unfolded like the petals of a delicate flower, fragile yet persistent, filled with tension and hope, setbacks and breakthroughs. What started as a simple curiosity about diet had become a quest for meaning, balance, and connection. And as she looked toward the horizon, Emma knew that whatever challenges lay ahead, she was no longer alone. She was part of something bigger, a story of survival, love, and the human spirit's relentless push to live not just longer, but better. Emma's voice, once heavy with doubt, now carried a quiet strength. Her journey had only just begun. Emma Carter's story didn't begin in a lab or a high-rise office but in a small town outside Cleveland, Ohio, where the rhythms of life moved with a steady, unhurried beat. Growing up, she was the youngest of 3 siblings, raised by a single mother named Linda who worked tirelessly as a nurse to keep the family afloat. Emma's earliest memories were filled with the scent of fresh bread baking in her grandmother's kitchen and the sound of soft jazz drifting through the rooms of their modest home. Her grandmother, Evelyn, was the cornerstone of the family, a woman of quiet strength and unwavering love, who taught Emma about resilience long before she understood the word. Evelyn had survived the hardships of the Great Depression, the loss of her husband in World War II, and a lifetime of raising children with little more than grit and faith. To young Emma, her grandmother was a hero, a living testament to the power of endurance and kindness. Evelyn was also a natural healer who believed deeply in the wisdom of food. She cooked meals from scratch, growing vegetables in her small garden and fermenting foods like sauerkraut and pickles with care. She always said, "Good food heals the body and the soul." Emma absorbed these lessons like a sponge, often sitting at the kitchen table with her grandmother as she prepared meals and told stories of their ancestors. These moments planted the seeds of Emma's fascination with health and longevity, though she wouldn't realize it until years later. Despite the love at home, Emma's childhood was not without hardship. Her mother's long shifts at the hospital meant Emma often felt lonely, and school was sometimes a battleground of awkwardness and anxiety. She was smart and curious but struggled to fit in with the other kids. Science became her refuge, the predictable laws of biology and chemistry offering a safe space away from the messy emotions of adolescence. Emma's father had left when she was very young, a fact she rarely spoke about but that left a quiet ache inside her. The absence of a father figure made her seek stability and approval in other ways, often pushing herself harder than necessary. Throughout high school, Emma excelled academically but struggled socially. She spent weekends volunteering at the local community center, where she met people from all walks of life and began to see the diversity of human experience. These encounters shaped her worldview, giving her a deep empathy for others and a drive to make a meaningful difference. At 17, tragedy struck when Evelyn passed away unexpectedly from a stroke. Emma was devastated. The woman who had been her anchor and guide was gone, leaving a void that seemed impossible to fill. In the days after Evelyn's death, Emma found herself clinging to the few lessons her grandmother had left behind, the importance of nourishment, patience, and love. She promised herself she would honor that legacy somehow, though she wasn't yet sure how. College offered a fresh start, and Emma chose to study molecular biology at Ohio State University. Immersed in her studies, she hoped to find answers about life, death, and health through science. But the years were tough. The rigorous coursework, combined with the emotional weight of loss, tested her limits. Late nights in the lab became the norm, and friendships took a backseat to deadlines. Still, Emma's passion never waned. She dreamed of breakthroughs that could prevent others from experiencing the pain she had known. After graduation, Emma landed a coveted position at a leading biotech firm in Boston, where she threw herself into research on aging and cellular regeneration. The work was demanding but exhilarating. She collaborated with some of the brightest minds in the field and felt on the brink of something revolutionary. Yet, success brought new challenges. The corporate culture valued speed and profit over patience and care, and Emma found herself caught in a cycle of relentless pressure. She began to lose sight of the balance her grandmother had taught her was so essential. The long hours and constant stress eroded her health, and the relationships she had left at home frayed. Her boyfriend Mark, a journalist who covered science and technology, watched with concern as Emma retreated further into her work. He tried to support her, but they often clashed over her refusal to slow down or ask for help. Beneath the surface, Emma battled feelings of isolation and self-doubt. Despite her accomplishments, she questioned whether she was truly making a difference or just running on a treadmill that never stopped. The memory of her grandmother's kitchen and the simple wisdom of traditional food lingered in the back of her mind like a distant melody. It was a reminder of a world she had left behind but that still called to her quietly. When Emma stumbled upon the video of Dr. Takashi Mori, something shifted. The image of the old doctor, so full of life and peace, was a stark contrast to the frenetic pace of her own existence. His message about the power of daily choices resonated deeply, rekindling a hope that had been buried beneath years of stress. Emma realized that to honor her grandmother's legacy, and to reclaim her own life, she needed to reconnect with the values she had lost. This meant more than just changing her diet, it meant embracing a philosophy that honored balance, community, and respect for the natural rhythms of life. She thought of the meals she had shared with Evelyn, the stories told over simmering pots of broth, and the way food had been a language of love and healing. It was time to bring that language back into her life. Emma's relationship with Mark was complicated. They had met during a science conference early in her career and bonded over a shared passion for discovery and innovation. Mark admired Emma's intellect and drive, but he also saw the toll her work was taking on her spirit. He longed for a connection that went beyond their professional interests. Emma wanted that too, but her fear of vulnerability and failure often held her back. She worried that slowing down would mean losing her edge, that admitting she needed support would be a sign of weakness. This internal conflict fueled many of their arguments and quiet silences. Yet, beneath it all, there was a deep love and respect. Mark's presence reminded Emma that life was more than data and deadlines, it was about people and moments that made the heart beat stronger. As Emma prepared to leave for Japan, she felt a mixture of excitement and apprehension. The journey ahead promised discovery but also demanded courage. She was stepping into the unknown, leaving behind the familiar pressures of her life to seek answers in a culture steeped in tradition and respect for aging. This decision marked a turning point, a chance to heal old wounds and grow beyond the limitations she had placed on herself. Emma knew that whatever happened next, she would carry the lessons of her past with her. The love of her grandmother, the sacrifices of her mother, the hope in Mark's eyes, all were threads woven into the fabric of who she was becoming. And as the plane lifted off the runway, she closed her eyes and whispered a promise, to live fully, to learn deeply, and to honor the quiet power of life's simplest choices. Emma Carter's journey into Japan's ancient wisdom was just beginning, but the tension between her old life and the new path she sought was already stirring inside her like a storm on the horizon. Back in Boston, her lab team awaited her return, projects were piling up, and her absence had already raised questions. She had taken a leave of absence from her demanding biotech job, hoping to find clarity and balance by embracing the lifestyle recommended by Dr. Takashi Mori, but the demands of her career, and her own perfectionism, refused to let her go easily. As she settled into a modest ryokan in Kyoto, the city's calm streets and soft temple bells seemed to pulse with a slower heartbeat than anything she had known. The contrast was stark. In Boston, her days had been a blur of emails, meetings, and experiments, every moment squeezed for productivity. Here, meals were rituals of mindfulness, each bite savored with gratitude. Still, Emma wrestled with guilt and doubt. Was she running away from responsibilities? Would her work in aging research stall, possibly even end, because she wasn't pushing herself to the limit? These questions gnawed at her as she studied Dr. Mori's advice. Eat fermented foods daily, embrace green tea, practice moderation, and cultivate calm in the mind. It sounded simple, but it demanded a revolution in her habits and mindset. One evening, Emma sat on the wooden veranda of the ryokan, sipping matcha tea, when her phone buzzed. It was Mark. "We need to talk," his message read. Emma's heart tightened. She knew that beneath his calm tone was worry and perhaps frustration. They had kept in touch sparingly since she left, but the distance was testing their relationship. When they finally spoke, Mark's voice was low but edged with tension. "Emma, I'm proud of what you're doing, but everything's falling apart here. Your lab needs you. Your colleagues don't understand why you left, and some are doubting if you'll come back." Emma's throat tightened. She hated that her absence was causing ripples of doubt, but she also knew she couldn't return to the way things were. "Mark, I need this. I need to find a way to live and work without burning out. This research, it's important, but so is me. So are the lessons I'm learning here." Mark sighed. "I get that, but you're risking your career. And us. Sometimes I wonder if you see me anymore or just your work." Emma felt a surge of guilt and defensiveness. Their conversation ended with no resolution, leaving a knot of unease deep inside her. The following days brought more challenges. While exploring Kyoto's food markets, Emma encountered skepticism from some locals when she admitted she was trying to adopt their traditional diet. "You don't understand," one elderly vendor said kindly but firmly. "It's not just about the food, it's about the way we live, the community, the seasons. Without that, it's just eating, not living." His words struck Emma. She realized that her attempt to transplant ancient practices into her own fast-paced life was superficial at best. She missed the deeper connection to place and people that gave the food its meaning. At the ryokan, she struggled to keep up with the daily routines of meditation and gentle exercise that Dr. Mori encouraged. Her mind, trained to sprint through problems, balked at stillness. Frustration mounted as old habits clashed with new intentions. One afternoon, Emma was invited to a small gathering hosted by Dr. Mori's daughter, Yuki, who was also a traditional healer. The group shared stories, meals, and laughter, embodying a community Emma yearned to belong to. Yet even here, she felt like an outsider. Her American ways and relentless ambition seemed out of place. She questioned if she could ever truly embrace this slower, interconnected way of life. A particularly difficult moment came when Emma received an urgent email from her lab. A key experiment had failed, jeopardizing months of work and funding. Her colleagues asked if she could return immediately to troubleshoot. The news landed like a thunderclap. She felt torn between loyalty to her career and the promise she had made to herself to change. That night, Emma lay awake wrestling with the weight of expectation. Was she betraying her team by staying in Japan? Was she betraying herself by considering leaving the high-powered world she had built? The conflict was fierce and exhausting. Yet even amid the turmoil, small moments of hope glimmered. A morning walk through a maple grove, the crisp leaves crunching underfoot, reminded her that change was natural, part of life's cycle. A shared meal of miso soup and seaweed salad warmed her body and spirit, reconnecting her to the lessons of nourishment her grandmother had taught her. She found support in unexpected friendships, including Yuki's gentle wisdom and the kindness of local shopkeepers who shared stories of their own struggles and triumphs. Emma began to see that transformation wasn't about abandoning her past but weaving it together with new threads. Her ambition need not be sacrificed but reshaped. She could pursue innovation with a heart tempered by patience and balance. Still, the path was far from smooth. Emma's relationship with Mark strained under the weight of distance and unresolved tension. Their calls became less frequent, messages shorter, the silence growing heavier. Emma feared losing not only her career but also the personal connections that gave her life meaning. When Dr. Mori invited her to visit his ancestral home in a remote mountain village, Emma hesitated. The journey promised solitude and reflection, but also isolation. After much contemplation, she accepted. The trip marked another turning point. Surrounded by towering pines and mist-shrouded peaks, Emma was forced to confront her fears and insecurities head-on. Without the distractions of technology and work, she faced the quiet voice inside herself, one that whispered doubts but also longings. She practiced the slow rituals of daily living, from tending a small garden to preparing traditional meals by hand. Each act became a meditation, a step toward healing. On the last evening of her stay, Dr. Mori shared a story from his youth. He spoke of a time when he too struggled with doubt and exhaustion, caught between the demands of modern medicine and the wisdom of his ancestors. The greatest challenge, he said, is not to conquer the world but to find peace within yourself. Emma absorbed the words, feeling them resonate deeply. She understood that her journey was not a race or a battle but a process of becoming whole. Returning to Kyoto, Emma felt a renewed sense of purpose. She resolved to integrate the lessons she had learned into her life back home, both personally and professionally. She envisioned a new approach to research that honored the complexity of human life, one that valued not only innovation but also compassion and balance. Yet, she also knew that the rising conflict between her ambitions and her newfound philosophy would continue to test her. The journey ahead promised more challenges but also the possibility of profound growth. Emma's story was evolving, moving from a place of tension and uncertainty toward hope and transformation. As she prepared to leave Japan and face the realities awaiting her in the United States, she held on to the wisdom of Dr. Mori and the quiet strength of her grandmother's legacy. The struggle between ambition and balance was far from over, but Emma was ready to face it with courage and an open heart. Emma's departure from the mountain village was both bittersweet and inspiring. The towering pines and misty mornings had grounded her in a way she hadn't expected, and yet the return to Kyoto and the life waiting for her in Boston loomed large. As she boarded the train, the rhythmic clatter of the wheels on the rails felt like the steady heartbeat of her journey, one that was far from over. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind of reflection and action. Emma had brought back more than just memories and photographs, she carried a new mindset, a vision for a future where science and tradition could coexist. Her first step was to create a daily ritual incorporating the simple but profound advice of Dr. Takashi Mori: eat fermented foods like natto and miso daily, sip green tea mindfully, walk barefoot when possible, and cultivate moments of stillness. Back in her temporary apartment in Kyoto, Emma started her mornings with a cup of freshly brewed matcha, savoring the earthy bitterness as a meditation. She prepared miso soup with seasonal vegetables, remembering her grandmother's words about the power of slow cooking and fresh ingredients. But the true test came when Emma began to experiment with these principles in her research. She reached out to a small group of colleagues who shared her curiosity about holistic approaches to aging. Together, they designed a pilot study that combined molecular biology techniques with observations of dietary and lifestyle factors inspired by Japanese traditions. The study was unconventional, blending quantitative data with qualitative insights from interviews and daily journals kept by participants. As the work progressed, Emma felt a renewed excitement. The research wasn't just about cells and molecules anymore, it was about real people, their stories, and how subtle shifts in habits could ripple through their health and happiness. The scientific community was skeptical at first, some peers dismissed the approach as too anecdotal or unscientific. But Emma stood firm, armed with data and the conviction that science should embrace complexity rather than shy away from it. Amid this professional challenge, Emma's personal life also began to shift. She and Mark resumed their conversations with greater honesty. Mark shared his fears about losing her to her work, while Emma admitted her struggles with vulnerability and control. They made a pact to support each other's growth, recognizing that love required patience and understanding as much as passion and ambition. The renewed connection grounded Emma in ways she hadn't anticipated, giving her strength to navigate the difficult choices ahead. Yet, not everything was smooth. The biotech firm she had left behind sent a formal notice that her position was at risk if she did not return soon. Pressure mounted from all sides, funders demanding results, colleagues skeptical of her new direction, and family members unsure about her unconventional path. Emma grappled with self-doubt. Was she chasing an idealistic dream at the expense of her career? Could she truly change a system that valued speed and profit above all? One evening, as she walked along the Kumo River, the sunset painted the sky in hues of orange and purple. Emma paused, letting the cool breeze wash over her. She thought about her grandmother's garden, the slow growth of plants reaching for the sun, and realized that transformation required time, patience, and resilience. Inspired, she doubled down on her efforts. Emma's pilot study began to yield promising results. Participants who adopted the daily rituals of fermented foods, green tea, and mindfulness reported improved energy, better sleep, and a stronger sense of well-being. Biological markers showed subtle but meaningful changes in inflammation and cellular health. These findings, though preliminary, hinted at a powerful synergy between ancient wisdom and modern science. Emma prepared to present the data at an international conference in Tokyo, where she hoped to bridge the gap between Western and Eastern perspectives on aging. The event was nerve-wracking. The audience was a mix of skeptics and open-minded researchers, all eager to hear new ideas but wary of unconventional methods. As Emma took the stage, she felt the familiar flutter of nerves but also a quiet confidence. She shared her story, not just the data but the journey that brought her here, the lessons from Dr. Mori, the legacy of her grandmother, and the hope that science could be more humane and holistic. Her presentation sparked lively debate and thoughtful questions. Some challenged her methods, others expressed curiosity and interest in collaboration. Emma realized that change was a process, not an instant revolution. Back in Kyoto, the months passed with steady progress. Emma formed deep friendships with local healers, scientists, and community members who welcomed her not as an outsider but as a fellow traveler seeking truth. She joined seasonal festivals, learned traditional crafts, and practiced daily rituals that nurtured body and soul. The lines between researcher and participant, teacher and student, began to blur. One particularly transformative experience was a visit to a small village famous for its centenarians. Emma spent days interviewing elders who shared stories of simple living, strong community bonds, and the joy found in nature and food. She tasted homemade pickles, fresh fish, and wild herbs, each bite a revelation. These moments reinforced her belief that longevity wasn't just a biological outcome but a lifestyle rooted in connection, meaning, and gratitude. Yet, as Emma's understanding deepened, so did the challenges. The biotech world's impatience threatened her funding, and her relationship with Mark faced new tests from the distance and shifting priorities. The tension between ambition and balance remained an ongoing struggle. Emma realized that the journey to live fully and to 100 years was not just about diet or science but about embracing imperfection, letting go of control, and opening to life's mysteries. In a quiet moment at a temple garden, watching cherry blossoms drift on the breeze, Emma felt a profound sense of peace. She understood that the path she walked was uniquely hers, a blend of cultures, dreams, science, and heart. As the petals settled softly on the ground, she whispered a promise to herself and to those she loved, to live with intention, to honor the wisdom of the past, and to create a future where longevity was a gift shared by all. The climactic journey was unfolding, not as a single event, but as a tapestry of moments woven together by courage, love, and hope. Emma's journey, which had started as a search for answers in ancient wisdom and science, took a sudden and dramatic turn during her time in Tokyo. The city's neon lights and bustling streets seemed to pulse with energy, a stark contrast to the quiet mountain village where she had found peace. Yet, here in the heart of Japan's capital, Emma was about to face a revelation that would shake her to the core and change everything she thought she knew about longevity, health, and the power of food. It began with a chance meeting at a conference dinner. Emma was introduced to Dr. Haruki Tanaka, a renowned geneticist who had spent decades studying the molecular basis of aging. Unlike many others who dismissed traditional diets as mere folklore, Dr. Tanaka was deeply interested in integrating modern genetics with the lifestyle practices of Japan's centenarians. Their conversation flowed easily, fueled by mutual respect and a shared passion for discovery. Over the following weeks, Dr. Tanaka invited Emma to his lab where she witnessed cutting-edge research on telomeres, the protective caps at the ends of chromosomes linked to cellular aging. The data was promising but complex, suggesting that diet and environment could influence genetic expression in ways science was just beginning to understand. Yet, the most profound moment came during a private discussion with Dr. Tanaka. He revealed findings from a multi-year study comparing the gut microbiomes of Japanese centenarians with those of younger adults in the West. The results showed a striking difference. The elders' microbiomes were rich in beneficial bacteria linked to inflammation control, immunity, and even mental health. The key, Dr. Tanaka explained, was not just the presence of these bacteria but the consistent daily consumption of fermented foods such as natto, miso, and pickled vegetables, foods deeply rooted in Japanese culture for centuries. This was the missing link Emma had been searching for. It wasn't just about isolated nutrients or supplements, it was about the living ecosystem within the gut, nurtured by traditional diets, that supported health and longevity. The science validated what her grandmother and Dr. Mori had long taught: food was medicine, but only when it was part of a broader lifestyle that included community, mindfulness, and respect for nature. Emma's excitement was tempered by a new understanding of the complexity and fragility of this system. Modern Western diets, heavy in processed foods and sugars, disrupted the gut microbiome and accelerated aging. Reversing this trend required more than individual effort, it demanded cultural change and deeper connection to how we live and eat. Emotionally, Emma felt a surge of hope but also urgency. She realized that her mission was bigger than she had imagined. She needed to share this knowledge not only through scientific papers but by telling stories that would resonate with everyday people. The challenge was daunting: how to bridge the gap between cutting-edge genetics and the simple wisdom of daily habits. As Emma delved deeper, she faced a personal crossroads. Her relationship with Mark, already strained by distance and differences, reached a breaking point. During a video call, they confronted the fears and frustrations that had been simmering beneath the surface. Mark admitted he felt left behind, that Emma's transformation made him question their future together. Emma, in turn, expressed her need for support and understanding, not judgment. The conversation was painful but necessary. They agreed to take time apart, recognizing that love sometimes means giving space to grow. This emotional climax was a turning point for Emma. She grieved the loss of what had been while embracing the possibility of what could be. Alone in her small Tokyo apartment, she began writing a journal, a place to process her emotions and crystallize her vision. She poured out memories of her grandmother's kitchen, the wisdom of Dr. Mori, and the breakthrough conversations with Dr. Tanaka. Through the act of writing, Emma found clarity. She understood that longevity was not a destination but a lifelong journey, a balance of science and spirit, progress and tradition. The next months were a whirlwind of activity. Emma traveled to rural communities known for their elders' remarkable health, documenting their stories and collecting dietary samples. She collaborated with local chefs who revived ancient fermentation techniques, blending culinary art with health science. She also connected with Western scientists and activists eager to rethink aging and wellness. These experiences deepened Emma's commitment and expanded her perspective. She began developing a comprehensive program that combined personalized nutrition, gut health, and mindful living, a blueprint for those seeking not just to add years to life but life to years. Yet, just as momentum built, Emma received news that rocked her world. Her mother, Linda, who had quietly battled chronic illness for years, was hospitalized. The distance that once felt like a necessary separation now felt like a painful chasm. Emma rushed home to Ohio, faced with the raw realities of family, aging, and care. At the hospital bedside, surrounded by beeping machines and the sterile smell of antiseptic, Emma confronted the vulnerability she had long avoided. The strong, selfless woman who raised her was now fragile and dependent. Emma's scientific mind raced to find answers, but it was her heart that taught her the deepest lessons, that love and presence mattered more than anything. Over the following weeks, Emma balanced hospital visits with remote work on her program. She felt the weight of exhaustion but also a fierce determination. Her mother's strength inspired her. Linda often reminded Emma to find joy even in hardship and to remember that healing was a mosaic of small moments. During one quiet afternoon, Emma sat holding her mother's hand, sharing stories of Japan, the discoveries she had made, and her hopes for a future where health was a shared journey. Linda smiled weakly, her eyes shining with pride and love. "You're doing something important, Emma. Don't lose sight of that." That moment crystallized everything. Emma realized that her mission was deeply personal, a way to honor her family's past and shape a better future for those she loved. She resolved to bring together the scientific rigor she valued with the heartfelt wisdom she had gathered. The emotional climax of Emma's story was not a single revelation but a tapestry of moments, scientific breakthroughs, personal heartbreak, and renewed purpose. It was a crescendo of hope and challenge, loss and resilience. As she prepared to return to Japan and continue her work, Emma felt a profound sense of peace mixed with determination. The truth was clear: longevity was more than genes or diets, it was about connection, to food, to culture, to family, and most importantly, to oneself. With this truth, Emma stepped into the next chapter of her journey, ready to share her discoveries with the world and inspire others to live fully, deeply, and with intention. Returning to Japan after the emotional upheaval with her mother, Emma felt the weight of her experiences settling into a new kind of strength. The trip home to Ohio had shaken her, revealing the delicate balance between ambition and compassion, science and humanity. She now understood that the lessons from Japan were not merely about diet or longevity but about the deeper ties that bind us to one another. Back in Kyoto, Emma resumed her work with a renewed sense of purpose. Her pilot study had grown into a collaborative project involving researchers in both Japan and the United States. The data continued to affirm the power of fermented foods, mindful living, and community support in promoting healthspan, the years we live not just alive but thriving. Yet, beyond the numbers, Emma found the real magic in the stories of the people she worked with. She visited local elders who welcomed her into their homes, sharing cups of green tea and memories of decades past. She watched families prepare meals together, children learning from grandparents the recipes and rituals that sustained them. These moments underscored a truth Emma had long overlooked in her scientific pursuit: that longevity was woven from love and sacrifice as much as from molecules and genes. One afternoon, while walking through a bustling market, Emma encountered an elderly woman named Hannah who had lived to 102. Hannah's eyes sparkled with warmth and humor as she recounted her life, a tapestry of hardship, loss, joy, and resilience. She spoke of raising 5 children during wartime, working tirelessly to provide for them, and the quiet satisfaction of watching her family grow. When Emma asked about her secret to a long life, Hannah smiled and said, "It's not a secret, really. It's about love, love for your family, your community, and yourself. It means sacrifice, yes, but also grace." Emma reflected on her own sacrifices, the strained relationship with Mark, the time away from her mother, the risk to her career. She realized that the path to longevity required more than personal discipline, it required connection and the willingness to give and receive support. These insights began to shape Emma's vision for her program, which now emphasized not only nutrition and science but also emotional well-being and community building. She developed workshops that combined cooking classes with storytelling circles, encouraging participants to share their histories and strengthen social bonds. In the lab, her team explored the biochemical markers linked to social engagement and stress reduction, uncovering fascinating correlations that hinted at the profound interplay between mind and body. Emma's work attracted attention from public health officials and community organizers eager to implement holistic approaches to aging. Invitations to speak at conferences and universities poured in, offering platforms to share her integrated model. Yet, despite growing recognition, Emma remained grounded. She continued her daily rituals of matcha, meditation, and mindful walking, finding in these practices a source of calm amid the busy pace of life. One significant turning point came when Emma was invited to participate in a documentary highlighting centenarians worldwide. Filming took her from Japan's serene countryside to vibrant cities in the United States and Europe. The project allowed her to meet people who, like Hannah, embodied the wisdom and resilience that come with age. Each story was unique, but common threads emerged: a sense of purpose, strong relationships, physical activity, and diets rich in natural, fermented foods. The documentary deepened Emma's conviction that longevity was a universal aspiration, transcending culture and geography. As the final scenes were shot, Emma stood beside a willow tree by a quiet lake, reflecting on how far she had come. From the young scientist chasing breakthroughs in a Boston lab to a woman who had embraced the complexity of life and health, she felt transformed. The journey had taught her that science was vital but incomplete without heart. Emma's personal life, too, had evolved. She and Mark found new ways to communicate, balancing independence with connection. Though they decided not to reunite as a couple, their friendship grew stronger, rooted in mutual respect and shared history. Emma also reconciled with her mother, who had gradually regained strength. Together, they nurtured a garden inspired by Japanese traditions, a living symbol of growth, patience, and love. As Emma prepared to present her comprehensive findings at a global health summit, she crafted her message carefully. She spoke not only as a researcher but as a storyteller. Sharing the laughter of elders, the aroma of fermented soy, and the delicate balance of modern life and ancient wisdom. Her presentation closed with a powerful reflection: life is full of surprises, but love will always lead the way. This message resonated deeply with the audience, many of whom approached Emma afterward to share their own stories of struggle and hope. The journey that began with a curious question, "What if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side?" had come full circle. Emma had discovered that even in the darkest moments, a silver lining exists in connection, resilience, and love. The story's resolution was not a neat ending but a profound beginning. Emma understood that living to 100 was not about defying death but about embracing life with intention and grace. The sacrifices made along the way were meaningful because they were acts of love. Emma's work continued to inspire those around her to rethink aging and health, blending science with spirit, and tradition with innovation. In this new chapter, she carried the lessons of Japan's oldest doctor, the wisdom of her grandmother, and her own hard-earned truths, living proof that longevity was a gift nurtured daily by what we eat, how we live, and whom we love. With the momentum of her recent successes and the emotional growth she had achieved, Emma returned to her work full of hope, but also aware that the path forward would not be without fresh challenges. As her research program gained international attention, the stakes grew higher, and the pressure from multiple fronts intensified. While some praised her integrative approach to aging and longevity, others within the scientific community remained skeptical or openly hostile, viewing her fusion of traditional wisdom and modern genetics as unorthodox and risky. The biotech industry, focused on rapid innovation and lucrative treatments, was less interested in slow, holistic methods that required cultural change and personal sacrifice. Funding became a constant battle, and Emma found herself navigating the complex world of grant proposals, investor meetings, and academic politics. The tension was palpable. On one side, Emma wanted to stay true to the holistic principles that had inspired her, the fermented foods, the mindful living, the power of community. On the other, she needed to deliver tangible results to satisfy funders and establish credibility. She wrestled with questions that had no easy answers. How much compromise was acceptable without losing the core of her mission? Could she bridge two very different worlds without being consumed by either? During this turbulent period, an unexpected ally emerged in the form of Dr. Jessica Park, a rising star in nutritional epidemiology from a prestigious university in California. Jessica had heard Emma's presentation at the Global Health Summit and was intrigued by her integrative approach. The two connected over their shared belief that addressing aging required more than isolated interventions, it needed a systems perspective that honored both biology and lived experience. Jessica's expertise in large-scale data analysis complemented Emma's qualitative and lab-based work, and together they dreamed of a collaborative study that could bring their fields together. This partnership energized Emma. They began designing a multi-site research project to explore the effects of fermented foods and lifestyle practices on aging biomarkers across diverse populations. The project aimed to gather both quantitative data, blood markers, genetic profiles, and qualitative data, participant narratives, mental health indicators, social engagement. The goal was ambitious, to create a comprehensive picture of how diet, culture, and community influence health span globally. However, the project also brought new challenges. Coordinating across institutions, securing funding, and managing diverse teams tested Emma's leadership and patience. The data collection revealed complex patterns that didn't always fit neat hypotheses, forcing Emma to confront the messy reality of real-life science. Meanwhile, tensions in Emma's personal life continued. Though she and Mark had accepted their changed relationship, the emotional residue of their breakup lingered. Emma also felt the strain of balancing her demanding work with the care of her aging mother, whose health fluctuated unpredictably. These pressures sometimes left Emma exhausted and doubting her capacity to sustain her vision. In moments of doubt, Emma returned to the simple rituals that had grounded her from the start: a morning cup of matcha, a mindful walk by the river, a call with friends who shared her values. She also sought support from local elders and community groups who reminded her that resilience often comes from leaning on others. One poignant moment came when Emma was invited to speak at a community center in a small town known for its active elderly population. After her presentation, she met George, a retired schoolteacher who had embraced fermented foods and social engagement for decades. George shared stories of his late wife, whose own longevity and vitality had been fueled by these practices. He offered Emma practical advice and encouragement, reminding her that progress in health was measured in small, consistent steps. This encounter reinforced Emma's belief in the power of connection and intergenerational learning. As the collaborative study progressed, preliminary results were encouraging but nuanced. Participants who adopted fermented foods and mindfulness practices showed improvements in markers of inflammation and mental well-being, but the effects varied depending on genetics, environment, and social support. Emma and Jessica realized that no one-size-fits-all solution existed. Personalized approaches were necessary. This insight shifted Emma's focus toward developing tailored wellness programs that could adapt to individual needs while preserving cultural integrity. At the same time, the biotech industry's skepticism manifested more overtly. Some companies began lobbying against Emma's work, fearing that holistic methods would disrupt the market for expensive pharmaceuticals and supplements. Emma received anonymous threats and her team faced public criticism in industry journals. The pressure tested Emma's resolve but also galvanized her support network. Journalists, community leaders, and patient advocates rallied behind her, amplifying the message that health should be accessible, inclusive, and grounded in evidence and empathy. Emma's journey had become not just a scientific quest but a movement for change. In the midst of these challenges, Emma discovered unexpected joy in mentoring young scientists, many of whom were inspired by her interdisciplinary approach and dedication to social impact. She encouraged them to ask hard questions, embrace uncertainty, and remember that science was ultimately about improving lives. This mentorship became a source of renewal and hope. Reflecting on the chapter of her life so far, Emma recognized the pattern of climaxes and setbacks, the highs of discovery and connection balanced by the lows of skepticism and personal sacrifice. But through it all, one truth remained clear: longevity was as much about resilience and adaptability as it was about diet or genetics. Emma's work had evolved into a tapestry of science, culture, and human spirit, woven together by the threads of curiosity, compassion, and courage. As she prepared to present her updated findings at the next international conference, Emma felt ready to face whatever lay ahead. She had learned that progress was rarely linear, and that true breakthroughs often emerged from collaboration and openness. With new allies at her side and a deeper understanding of the complexities of aging, Emma was more committed than ever to her mission, to inspire a world where living to 100 was not just a dream, but a joyful reality nurtured daily by what we eat, how we live, and the love we share. Emma's journey toward unraveling the secrets of longevity had taken her across continents, into laboratories, and into the homes of centenarians, through moments of joy and heartbreak. As she delved deeper into her collaborative research with Dr. Jessica Park, she realized that the greatest challenge wasn't merely scientific, it was cultural. Bridging the gap between centuries-old traditions and the rapid pace of modern innovation required sensitivity, respect, and creativity. Emma's visits to Japan had taught her that longevity was inseparable from cultural identity. The fermented foods she so admired, miso, natto, pickled vegetables, were more than just nutrition, they were rituals connecting generations, communities, and values. Yet, she also knew that in many parts of the world, fast food and processed meals had displaced these practices, eroding gut health and social bonds. She asked herself, how could the wisdom of Japan's oldest doctor and her grandmother's kitchen be translated into today's globalized world without losing its soul? To explore this, Emma organized a series of cultural exchange workshops. Bringing together chefs, scientists, community leaders, and elders from both Japan and the United States, these gatherings became vibrant forums of learning and dialogue. Participants shared recipes, research findings, and stories, exploring how tradition could inform innovation in food and health. At one workshop in Kyoto, Emma watched as a young Japanese chef demonstrated the art of fermenting vegetables using time-honored techniques passed down from his grandmother. Nearby, a California nutritionist spoke about microbiome research and the rise of probiotics, drawing parallels between ancient practices and cutting-edge science. The energy was electric. Emma recognized that innovation did not mean discarding tradition. Rather, it meant honoring and adapting it for new contexts. From these workshops, Emma's team began developing a series of accessible fermented food products tailored for Western palates but rooted in authentic Japanese methods. Collaborating with food scientists and local artisans, they crafted miso-based dressings, probiotic-rich snacks, and even plant-based natto alternatives. These products aimed not only to improve gut health but also to reconnect people with the stories and values embedded in their food. Parallel to product development, Emma's research deepened. They began using AI and machine learning to analyze vast datasets linking dietary habits, microbiome profiles, genetic markers, and health outcomes. This integration of technology and tradition opened new vistas. For example, By mapping how specific fermented foods influenced gene expression related to inflammation and immune response, Emma's team could personalize nutrition recommendations more accurately than ever before. Yet, Emma remained cautious. The power of technology was undeniable, but it risked depersonalizing a deeply human process. She insisted on keeping storytelling, cultural context, and emotional well-being central to her programs. Longevity was not just a biological equation, it was a lived experience. While the project flourished, Emma faced personal moments of reflection. Her mother's health stabilized, but the memory of their time together during illness lingered as a reminder of life's fragility. Emma reached out to old friends and built new friendships with those who shared her vision. She found solace in daily rituals, meditation, journaling, cooking, and joy in the laughter of community gatherings. One particularly moving experience came during a trip to Okinawa, home to one of the world's highest concentrations of centenarians. Emma spent time with local residents, observing how they balanced physical activity, social engagement, and diet. She was struck by the simplicity and consistency of their lifestyle, marked by daily walks, shared meals, and a sense of purpose called ikigai. Emma felt humbled and inspired. Back in the lab, these insights influenced their approach to health span. They expanded their focus beyond gut health and genetics to include mental health, physical activity, and social connectedness as integral components of longevity. This holistic perspective began to resonate with health practitioners and policymakers who recognized the limitations of reductionist approaches. As the project gained traction, Emma encountered new critics, particularly from sectors invested in quick fixes and pharmaceutical solutions. Some dismissed her work as soft science or questioned the scalability of culturally grounded interventions. Emma responded by doubling down on rigorous methodology and transparent communication. She published peer-reviewed papers, presented at major conferences, and engaged with the media to demystify her approach. She emphasized that longevity required systems thinking, an integration of biology, culture, psychology, and environment. Emma also leveraged digital platforms to reach broader audiences. She launched a podcast series featuring conversations with centenarians, scientists, chefs, and everyday people embracing fermented foods and mindful living. The podcast became a space where listeners could connect with stories that celebrated resilience, curiosity, and hope. Emma invited her audience to share their experiences, fostering a global community united by a desire to live fully and healthily. As this chapter of her work unfolded, Emma recognized how her own identity had evolved. The scientist who once sought clear-cut answers had grown into a storyteller, mentor, and bridge builder. She embraced complexity and uncertainty, learning that progress often came through dialogue, humility, and persistence. In her quiet moments, she thought back to the opening question that had launched her journey: what if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side? Emma now knew the answer was not just survival but transformation, finding new connections, meaning, and hope in unexpected places. The fusion of tradition and innovation was more than a research strategy, it was a metaphor for life itself. As Emma looked toward the future, she envisioned expanding her program to reach diverse communities worldwide, adapting lessons from Japan's oldest doctor and beyond to create a tapestry of health that honored culture, science, and humanity. Her work had become a beacon, illuminating pathways to longevity that were accessible, joyful, and deeply human. And through it all, Emma carried the lessons of love, sacrifice, and resilience, knowing that living to 100 was not merely about the years counted but the lives touched along the way. Emma's growing understanding of longevity increasingly centered on a concept that transcended diet and genetics: community. The bonds we form, the support we give and receive, and the sense of belonging all emerged as fundamental pillars in the pursuit of a long, meaningful life. This insight deepened her commitment to integrating social connection into her research and public programs. She realized that the old Japanese saying, "a single arrow is easily broken, but not 10 in a bundle," captured an essential truth about human resilience. Emma's work began shifting from individual-focused interventions toward fostering networks that could nurture health collectively. She launched a pilot project in a small town outside Kyoto, partnering with local community centers, elders, and volunteers to create longevity circles. These were weekly gatherings where participants shared meals featuring fermented foods, engaged in gentle exercise like Tai Chi, and exchanged stories about their lives and traditions. The project was designed to combat loneliness and promote emotional well-being as much as physical health. Observing these circles in action, Emma felt a profound sense of connection. The laughter, the shared memories, the mutual support, all these elements seemed to spark vitality in participants. People who had been isolated began to re-engage with their communities, and new friendships blossomed across generations. The effects rippled outward, influencing families and neighborhoods. Encouraged by the pilot's success, Emma adapted the model for urban settings in the U.S., partnering with churches, libraries, and senior centers in her hometown of Cleveland. She encountered different challenges here: busy schedules, diverse cultural backgrounds, and sometimes skepticism about the benefits of fermented foods and slow living. But the universal human need for connection transcended barriers. In these urban longevity circles, Emma witnessed stories of transformation. One woman, Gloria, who had struggled with depression and isolation after losing her husband, found new purpose and joy through the group. She became a passionate advocate for fermented cooking, teaching others and rekindling ties with her grandchildren. Another participant, Carlos, a retired factory worker, shared how the gentle exercise and social interaction improved his mobility and mood, giving him a renewed sense of agency. Emma documented these narratives alongside biometric data, aiming to capture the holistic benefits of community engagement. Her findings highlighted reductions in stress hormones, improvements in cardiovascular markers, and enhanced cognitive function, all linked to social participation and diet. These results challenged the conventional focus on medication and isolated lifestyle changes. Emma's project gained media attention, with stories featured in national health magazines and local news segments. The narrative of simple, culturally rooted practices transforming lives resonated widely, especially amid growing concerns about the mental health crisis and the aging population. Yet, as Emma's work expanded, so did the complexity. She grappled with questions about scalability and inclusivity. How could such intimate, relational programs be replicated on a large scale without losing their essence? How could they be adapted for communities with different languages, traditions, and resources? Emma's team experimented with digital tools, creating virtual longevity circles that connected people across distances. While technology could never replace in-person connection, these platforms provided valuable opportunities for outreach and engagement, especially during the COVID-19 pandemic that had reshaped social norms globally. Throughout this period, Emma remained deeply influenced by the stories of Japan's oldest doctor, who often spoke of moai, a lifelong support group concept from Okinawa. This practice exemplified the power of consistent social networks in buffering stress and promoting longevity. Emma's work sought to honor and reinterpret such traditions in a modern context. The integration of science and culture was evident in how participants described their experiences. They spoke of fermented foods not just as nutrition but as symbols of care and heritage. They described movement and storytelling as ways to keep body and mind alive and connected. Emma's research underscored that health was deeply relational, woven through the fabric of everyday life. On a personal level, Emma found that her own connections deepened. The friendships formed through her work became sources of support and inspiration. She reconnected with her mother in new ways, sharing cooking sessions and walks, rebuilding bonds previously strained by illness and distance. Emma also maintained a close friendship with Jessica Park, whose scientific rigor and enthusiasm provided balance and encouragement. The challenges of balancing career, family, and self-care remained, but Emma approached them with greater mindfulness and grace. She knew that no one could thrive in isolation and that embracing vulnerability was part of true strength. A pivotal moment came when Emma was invited to speak at an international summit on aging and public health. She chose to focus her presentation on the role of community, sharing both data and heartfelt stories from her longevity circles. She emphasized that policy and healthcare systems must prioritize social infrastructure, safe spaces for connection, culturally appropriate programming, and recognition of caregiving as essential work. Her message resonated with policymakers and practitioners alike, sparking dialogues about reimagining aging in more holistic terms. Following the summit, Emma collaborated with urban planners and social workers to develop community health hubs modeled on her research. These hubs combined nutritional education, movement classes, social events, and mental health support, aiming to create ecosystems where longevity could flourish naturally. Through it all, Emma remained grounded in the belief that every person's journey to a long and meaningful life was unique, shaped by personal history, culture, and relationships. Her work was not about prescribing a single formula but about creating environments that honored diversity and nurtured connection. Looking back, Emma marveled at how the question that had launched her journey had evolved. What if you suddenly lost everything and had no one by your side? The answer was clear: we are stronger together. Love, family, and community are not just emotional comforts but essential components of health and longevity. As Emma continued to build bridges between science and tradition, technology and humanity, individuals and communities, she felt a profound sense of purpose. The road ahead was long, filled with uncertainty, but illuminated by the bright possibility that by embracing connection, we could all live fuller, healthier lives. Emma's story had become a testament to the power of community, a legacy she hoped would inspire generations to come. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Emma stood on the stage beneath the soft lights of a sprawling convention hall in Singapore, facing an audience of thousands. Her palms were slightly damp, but her voice was steady. Years of research, travel, heartbreak, and healing had brought her to this moment. She wasn't here as just a scientist anymore, she was a messenger, a translator of deep truths that spanned continents and generations. Behind her, the screen lit up with an image of a 106-year-old Japanese woman tending a vegetable garden. "This is not just longevity," Emma said, "this is living. This is purpose." The crowd sat in silence, absorbing her words as she walked them through her discoveries: how fermented food supported gut health, how daily rituals provided mental structure, how social connection reduced inflammation and extended health span, how cultural traditions encoded wisdom that couldn't be captured in a lab report. She showed charts and statistics, but also photographs, snippets of diary entries, stories of people whose lives had changed not because of a pill, but because of a shift in perspective, a return to what it means to be human. After her talk, the crowd erupted in applause. Emma felt not pride, but a quiet responsibility. The message was out now, and it had to be protected, nurtured, shared with care. Soon after, interviews followed, health podcasts, national TV, even a conversation with a well-known entrepreneur-turned-wellness advocate who had built a global tech platform and now wanted to explore wellness through culture. This entrepreneur, Daniel Beck, invited Emma to collaborate on an initiative that could scale her work globally through technology, an app that would guide users through building their own longevity practices based on her research. Emma hesitated. The idea of digitizing something so intimate, so rooted in real-world connection, felt risky. But Daniel seemed sincere. His platform wasn't about quick fixes, he wanted stories, recipes, cultural rituals, everything Emma had spent years documenting. And his reach was massive. After much deliberation, Emma agreed to a pilot version, on one condition: it had to include real community features. People couldn't just track steps and meals, they had to engage with others, share stories, find mentors, ask questions. This wasn't about gamifying health, it was about humanizing it. The pilot launched in phases across Japan, the US, and parts of Europe, and the early results were surprising. Users not only adopted fermented foods into their diets, but also formed support groups, met for weekly walks, revived old family recipes, and even started local gardens modeled after the ones Emma had photographed in Okinawa. The app's forums became digital moai, echoes of Okinawan lifelong support groups, and Emma watched as strangers became allies, encouraging each other through grief, illness, and change. But as the app gained popularity, detractors appeared again. Influencers mocked it as grandma science, tech purists called it too emotional, too slow, and some nutritionists criticized it for not offering rigid calorie tracking or standardized meal plans. Emma stayed true to her principles. She posted a video response filmed in her Kyoto kitchen, explaining why fermented miso soup mattered more than macros, why listening to your body and sharing meals with others could never be replaced by algorithms alone. The video went viral, not because of controversy, but because of resonance. People were tired of being treated like machines. They craved stories, rituals, connection. They wanted to live longer, yes, but not at the cost of joy. Meanwhile, Emma expanded her team. She brought on community organizers, therapists, chefs, and elders from multiple cultures. The vision grew clearer, a global network of longevity hubs, both digital and physical, rooted in local traditions but united by shared principles: gut health, emotional resilience, daily movement, social bonds, and a sense of meaning. One of the most moving moments came when Emma visited a hub in Lisbon, Portugal. There, a group of widows had formed a fermentation club, using her app as inspiration. They met twice a week, shared pickled vegetable recipes, taught each other dances from their youth, and supported one another through grief and laughter. "You saved us," one woman told Emma through a translator, tears in her eyes. "Not because of food. Because you reminded us we are not alone." Emma returned to her hotel that night overwhelmed, humbled. Her heart ached with the beauty of it, how small shifts could ripple out into waves of change. She thought about her grandmother's quiet strength, Dr. Mori's patient wisdom, the laughter in Okinawan gardens, her mother's fragile fingers planting herbs with her back in Ohio. They were all part of this. Their legacy lived through every kombucha class, every group walk, every child learning to make natto with a grandparent. Back at her Kyoto base, Emma began assembling a book. Not a scientific manual, but a collection of narratives, photos, rituals, and reflections. She called it, A Life Worth Living, Lessons from the Longest Lives on Earth. She wove together stories of centenarians, data on inflammation and gut flora, recipes passed down through generations, and guidance on creating your own moai. The book became a bestseller, not because it promised youth, but because it offered wisdom, something timeless in an era obsessed with speed. People didn't just want to live longer, they wanted to live deeper. Emma was invited to speak at universities, health policy councils, and even the United Nations on Aging. She advocated for community-based longevity programs, better nutritional education, and mental health support for elders. In her speeches, she said, "We already know how to live well, we've just forgotten to listen to those who've done it longest." Despite the public acclaim, Emma remained grounded. She spent quiet mornings writing, testing new recipes, walking familiar forest paths. Her mother's health, while not perfect, had stabilized. They video-called often, sometimes just to sit in silence while sipping tea, connected across time zones and decades. Emma never forgot what launched her journey, that terrifying question: what if you lost everything and had no one by your side? She now saw how that question had become a mission. To make sure others never felt that way. To show that even when life strips us bare, connection can rebuild us. Love, in its many forms, was the most powerful longevity tool of all. The final pages of her book closed with a photo, a long table in a sunlit garden, surrounded by people of all ages, passing bowls of steaming miso, laughing, crying, remembering. Below it, a single line: "This is the cure." Emma knew there was still much work to be done. More research, more hubs to open, more traditions to protect and share. But she no longer felt the need to race toward answers. The path stretched ahead, and she would walk it with others. Because in the end, living to 100 wasn't the point. Living every day like it mattered, that was. The message had reached further than Emma ever imagined, but she had no idea her next collaboration would begin with a single message that read, I've been following your work. It's time we talk. Elon. At first, she thought it was a prank. But after her team verified the message's authenticity, Emma found herself on a video call with Elon Musk. He appeared relaxed, sitting in what looked like the deck of a starship hangar, dressed in a dark t-shirt, curious and engaged. "You're doing something rare," he began. "You're addressing longevity the right way, human first, culture-driven. Most people are still trying to bottle it and sell it." Emma, both surprised and intrigued, asked him why he'd reached out. "Because I think you've solved a different part of the problem," he replied. "We're making great strides in regenerative medicine and AI-driven diagnostics, but we're missing the ground-level piece. The human behavioral layer. You've figured out how to build systems people actually live by." Over the next hour, their conversation flowed from Okinawan gardens to colonizing Mars, from gut microbiomes to synthetic biology. They came from entirely different worlds, Emma grounded in empathy and slowness, Elon sprinting into the future, but the connection was real. Emma was cautious. She admired Elon's innovation but worried that his speed and scale could dilute the intimacy that made her work meaningful. Yet he made a proposal she couldn't ignore. "Let's build a city," he said. "A longevity city. On Earth first. A prototype for Mars. We merge your model, fermented food, rituals, social connection, with advanced biotech, sustainable design, AI infrastructure. You bring the soul, I'll bring the systems." Emma paused, stunned. A city? She'd spent years working on neighborhoods, villages, digital spaces, but a city designed from the ground up for human flourishing? It was outrageous. And brilliant. She agreed, on the condition that the first prototype would be rooted in community-driven design, not top-down imposition. The people would shape it. Their first meetings were held in a think tank format, pulling together Emma's researchers, Elon's engineers, urban planners, sociologists, chefs, elders from different traditions, and even schoolteachers. It was chaos. Ideas clashed. Scientists debated ethical boundaries. Planners argued over infrastructure. But Emma kept returning them to a single question: what makes people feel alive? The answer wasn't just green tech or medical innovation. It was shared meals, safe gathering spaces, intergenerational learning, walkability, opportunities to contribute beyond retirement. The city, they agreed, would be a living laboratory, part research hub, part sanctuary. They named it Ikonomi, derived from a blend of Japanese words meaning purpose of life. It would be built in a semi-rural area of California, on land Elon's company had acquired for experimental projects. The design was inspired by Japanese villages and Scandinavian ecotowns, incorporating geothermal energy, aquaponic farms, fermented food kitchens, public tea houses, movement paths, and story halls where elders passed on knowledge. Houses were clustered by interest and life stage to encourage organic mentorship. Emma insisted on analog touches, handwritten boards, physical books, dirt paths, interwoven with smart infrastructure that quietly monitored health and environmental data to ensure safety and sustainability. No one was forced to track anything. The data was opt-in and community-owned. As construction began, a diverse group of residents, scientists, artists, farmers, nurses, retirees, parents, applied to join the pilot population. Emma and Elon agreed that the first 100 residents would shape the model, and if it succeeded, they'd scale globally. Within 6 months, Ikonomi opened its gates. Emma moved into a modest cottage beside a small fermentation lab and herb garden. It felt surreal, like stepping into a dream that someone had dared to build. The first few weeks were magical. Residents cooked together, planted gardens, held fireside circles. Children asked questions about microbes and built terrariums from scratch. The elderly taught calligraphy, sewing, and how to make kimchi. Biometric health indicators quietly improved, stress levels dropped, sleep quality increased, and inflammation markers declined. Yet Emma knew challenges would come. And they did. 1 month in, a group of residents began expressing discomfort with the level of data collection, even though it was voluntary. Others felt anxious about the constant togetherness, craving more privacy. Some grew frustrated by the dietary restrictions designed to mimic traditional longevity diets. Emma gathered the community for a town hall. She listened, deeply, then asked everyone to write down what longevity meant to them. The answers varied: freedom, love, contribution, curiosity, joy. That exercise re-centered the project. The community voted to implement zones of privacy, flexible food programs, and regular, solo days, where no group activities were scheduled. Elon, observing from a distance, was fascinated by the adaptation process. "This is exactly why we need you," he told Emma during a walk through the central garden. "You're designing for real humans, not just optimal outcomes." Word of Ikonomi spread fast. Media outlets dubbed it, "the village that might outlive us all." Skeptics visited and left surprised by its warmth. Health officials from Europe and Asia came to study the model. One UN delegate described it as, "a glimpse into a post-industrial future that remembers what it means to be human." Emma stayed focused. She spent her days in the fermentation lab, experimenting with new probiotic strains and ancestral recipes. She hosted weekly storytelling nights in the story hall. Her mother even came to live in the city part-time, finding comfort in the community's rhythm and care. One quiet evening, as Emma sat sipping warm Jamaica by the garden, a child approached her with a hand-drawn picture. It was a house with a garden, people holding hands, a jar of pickles, and the words, "This is how I'll live forever." Emma smiled, tears in her eyes. This, she realized, was the true legacy, not the labs, the press, or even the city. It was the seed of an idea planted in hearts, growing into rituals, relationships, and choices that would shape generations. That night, she wrote in her journal, "Longevity isn't the finish line. It's the way we walk the path, with care, with each other, and with a deep memory of where we came from." Ikonomi was just beginning, but Emma's vision had already taken root around the world. What started as a question, "What if you lost everything?" had become a living answer: build something together, something grounded in love, purpose, and daily acts of care. And as the stars above Ikonomi shimmered over gardens, laughter, and quietly fermenting jars, Emma knew this was no longer just a story. It was a way of life. Emma woke early, as she always did in Ikonomi, with the soft light of dawn slipping through the washi paper windows and the earthy scent of miso and dew clinging to the air. The city was quiet at that hour, only the distant murmur of water flowing through the stone irrigation channels and the rhythmic sweep of brooms as volunteers cleaned the community paths. She pulled on a light sweater and stepped outside into the cool morning. Today was different. A delegation of global elders was arriving, individuals over the age of 100, representing traditions and nations from across the world. The idea had come during a planning meeting when one resident, a former anthropologist, suggested, "Why not invite those who've lived longest to tell us how they did it? Not just the science. The lived wisdom." Emma loved the idea immediately. If Ikonomi was to be a prototype for long, meaningful life, it had to listen, not just to data and lab reports, but to stories that had survived wars, migrations, famines, revolutions, and personal grief. That morning, the elders began arriving, some with canes, some with wheelchairs, others walking proudly on their own. A 103-year-old herbalist from Ghana, a 101-year-old former poet from Lebanon, a 108-year-old retired schoolteacher from South Korea, a 100-year-old jazz singer from New Orleans. Each came with their caregiver or family member, and each carried decades of memory behind their eyes. The welcome ceremony was modest but heartfelt. Emma stood before them, hands gently clasped. "We built this city because we believed health comes from connection. And now we ask to connect with you, to learn what the textbooks can't teach." Over the next week, Ikonomi transformed into a tapestry of voices and traditions. Every evening, the elders sat in the open-air story hall while residents and visitors gathered around on cushions or benches. One by one, the centenarians told their truths. The South Korean teacher described the power of routine, rising early, preparing meals by hand, walking a certain path each day, the sense of calm that came from repetition. The jazz singer spoke about rhythm, not just in music but in life, balancing solitude with performance, loss with joy, work with laughter. You gotta feel the downbeat, she said, tapping her cane like a drumstick, or else you never know when to rise. The herbalist from Ghana told stories of walking miles each day to fetch water, of learning the language of plants from her grandmother, of cooking with intention. Everything you put in your mouth, she said, should have a story. Otherwise it's just fuel. And the poet from Lebanon wept as he recalled his wife, gone 20 years now, and how writing a line of verse each morning kept him anchored to life. Emma listened, night after night, her notebook full but her heart fuller. The wisdom shared was not formulaic. It was deeply personal. But patterns emerged: faith, friendship, forgiveness, movement, meaningful work, laughter, and above all, love. These elders did not merely survive. They had adapted, healed, remembered. Their stories showed resilience not as a trait but a practice. On the fourth day, Emma led a panel discussion with the elders and younger Ikonomi residents. A teenager asked, "What's the most important thing we should be doing right now to live to 100? The Ghanaian herbalist leaned forward. Live today in a way your future self will thank you for. Not just in your body, but in your spirit." The jazz singer added, "And don't live it alone. People make people whole." The conversation stirred something profound in the audience. It wasn't about supplements or statistics. It was about choosing to be present, to honor the small rituals, to create a life that felt true. Emma realized that even though she had gathered massive amounts of data over the years, on microbiomes, inflammatory markers, genetic expressions, it was these intangible truths that mattered most. Stories. Meaning. Connection. That night, she met with Elon again, this time sitting on a bench overlooking the koi pond in Ikonomi's central garden. He had flown in quietly to observe the Elder Summit. "It's incredible," he said. "They're more optimized for survival than any tech we've built. Because they've lived everything." Emma nodded. "And they don't want to be remembered for being old. They want to be remembered for loving well. Teaching. Laughing. Holding space." Elon, thoughtful, looked at the stars. "We could build 10 more Ikonomis. Put them on the moon, Mars even. But if we don't remember how to listen, they'll just be hollow shells." "That's the risk," Emma said. "Scaling the exterior without the soul." But she also knew there was power in what they were building. Ikonomi had become a living classroom, a sanctuary, and a movement. She announced plans to launch a digital archive of the Elder Summit, audio recordings, video interviews, handwritten letters, all accessible through the app, schools, and public libraries. She also proposed a global elder-in-residence program, where each Ikonomi-style city would host a centenarian who would help guide community life. The response was overwhelming. Universities, non-profits, even governments pledged to support the initiative. Age, Emma said during her next public talk, isn't something to hide. It's a library. And every time we lose an elder without listening, it's like burning a book we can never rewrite. On the final evening of the summit, the entire city gathered for a shared meal, the table winding like a snake through the central garden. There were dishes from every culture, many made from traditional fermented ingredients. Laughter, music, and candlelight filled the air. The elders sat at the center, honored not just for their age but for their courage to be vulnerable, to remember. As the night wore on, Emma stood quietly near the edge, watching the interplay of old and young, of flavors and languages, of time and healing. This was everything she had dreamed, and more. She didn't feel like a scientist or a founder. She felt like a weaver, threading together stories, spaces, and souls into something enduring. And as she stood beneath the soft glow of lanterns, listening to the rustle of leaves and the murmur of lives well lived, she knew, this chapter was not an ending, but a turning. Because now, the oldest voices were guiding the future. And their message was clear: live slowly. Love deeply. Share everything. After the Elder Summit, Ikonomi buzzed with a renewed sense of purpose. The presence of the centenarians had shifted the city's heartbeat, making everything feel more sacred, more intentional. People walked slower, greeted each other more often, and began to treat each ordinary task, cooking, planting, listening, as part of a greater, living tradition. Emma felt it too, and she knew it was time to address a question she'd been quietly turning over in her mind for years: how do we teach longevity, not just live it? Could the practices, insights, and emotional intelligence required for long, healthy living be distilled into something teachable, not a checklist, but a lived experience? That question gave birth to the longevity curriculum. It wasn't a university program or a traditional course. Emma envisioned it as a framework, adaptable to age, culture, and environment, rooted in the rituals and rhythms of life itself. The goal was to offer people of all backgrounds a guide for shaping lives that aligned with longevity, not as a goal, but as a natural result of meaningful living. The curriculum would be tested first in Ikonomi, and then, if successful, shared globally through the app and local community centers. Emma gathered a diverse team of educators, elders, behavioral scientists, artists, and even children. She insisted that the curriculum be co-created, not imposed. If we want to teach what matters, she told her team, we must begin by listening to what people already know deep down. The curriculum was built around 7 pillars: nourishment, movement, connection, purpose, stillness, story, and adaptation. Each pillar represented a facet of longevity observed across cultures and scientific studies. But rather than teaching them as subjects, the curriculum immersed people in experiences. For nourishment, students didn't just learn about gut bacteria, they fermented their own foods, learned family recipes, and explored the cultural significance of meals. Movement wasn't about fitness goals, it was about joyful activity, from traditional dance to nature walks to daily stretching. Connection involved building moai, small, supportive groups that met regularly for shared experiences. For purpose, participants engaged in reflective journaling, intergenerational mentorship, and projects that served their community. Stillness was about mindfulness, not in an abstract sense, but through daily practices like tea-making, gardening, or silent meals. Story encouraged people to record their family histories, interview elders, and reflect on life lessons. Adaptation taught resilience through change, how to face grief, aging, and failure with grace. Emma piloted the curriculum in small groups within Ikonomi. At first, participants were skeptical. Some expected more lectures, more rules. But as the days unfolded, something shifted. The program felt less like a class and more like a return, like being reminded of something ancient and human. A group of teenage residents created a project interviewing the oldest members of the community and producing a short documentary. A group of retirees designed a multicultural fermentation guidebook. Parents began using curriculum tools at home, teaching their children about emotional regulation through story circles and preparing traditional meals together. One man, a former tech executive who had struggled with anxiety and burnout, found unexpected peace during the stillness module. He began meditating during the daily sunrise walk, then wrote a piece for the Ikonomi newsletter titled, "The Day I Stopped Running and Started Living." Emma watched as these changes rippled outward. The curriculum didn't just teach people how to live longer, it reawakened their desire to live better. It brought memory and meaning back into education. Inspired by the success, Emma and her team translated the curriculum into 12 languages and began working with global partners to adapt it for local use. In Mexico, schools integrated pieces of it into their wellness programs. In Sweden, retirement homes adopted the moai system to combat isolation. In Nairobi, a youth nonprofit used the story pillar to connect teens with community elders. The results were astonishing. In each location, the same thing happened: people began to slow down, reconnect, heal. Reports showed reductions in depression, improved sleep, better dietary habits, and most importantly, a rise in perceived life satisfaction. Emma was flooded with letters from around the world. A teacher in Poland wrote, "For the first time, I feel I'm not just teaching for the test, I'm teaching for life." A nurse in Thailand wrote, "This curriculum reminded me why I became a caregiver in the first place." A teenager in Brooklyn wrote, "It made me want to talk to my grandmother again." Despite the growing success, Emma remained cautious. She knew the dangers of overcommercialization, of turning something sacred into another wellness product. She refused licensing deals with major fitness corporations who wanted to scale the program for productivity. She prioritized partnerships with libraries, public schools, community kitchens, and local governments. She kept the core resources free, open source, and culturally adaptable. Then came an invitation that made her pause. The World Health Organization wanted to formally evaluate the longevity curriculum as a model for preventive global health education. The potential impact was massive, but it meant navigating politics, bureaucracy, and pressure to conform. Emma agreed, but on one condition: the WHO committee had to visit Ikonomi and experience the program firsthand. A delegation arrived in the spring. For 1 week, they lived as residents, joining daily meals, movement walks, story nights, and the curriculum modules. They laughed, cried, and even helped pickle daikon in the fermentation shed. On their final day, one official, a stern man from Germany, turned to Emma and said, "I thought this was soft science. But this is the hardest, truest thing I've learned in years." The WHO endorsed the curriculum, calling it a transformative blend of cultural wisdom and evidence-based well-being practices. Emma gave a presentation at their headquarters in Geneva, opening with a simple statement: "We've spent too long treating health like a machine. But humans are not machines. We are ecosystems, stories, relationships. If we want to thrive, we have to nourish the whole." As Emma returned home to Ikonomi, she walked through the community gardens where residents were harvesting Napa cabbage and purple sweet potatoes. Children ran barefoot on the warm earth. An elder sang a lullaby under a cherry tree. Everything felt so alive. And she realized that what they had created was not just a curriculum. It was a new kind of memory. A way of remembering how to live well, passed from hand to hand, like a bowl of warm soup on a cold night. That night, Emma wrote the opening line to the longevity curriculum's official guide: "The secret to a long life is not in a pill, a lab, or a number. It's in how we love, how we move, how we share, how we listen. It's in what we choose to remember. And what we choose to teach." The next morning, she sent it out into the world. The story continued. Despite the momentum of Ikonomi and the global spread of the longevity curriculum, Emma knew nothing sustainable came without disruption. Real change often triggered resistance, and that resistance was about to manifest in a form she hadn't anticipated. It started with a report, an investigative piece published by a major international news outlet. The headline was designed to provoke: "Longevity Lies? The billion-dollar wellness experiment you never voted for." The article questioned the science behind Emma's curriculum, suggesting it was based more on folklore than hard evidence. It criticized the partnership with Elon Musk, hinting at motives of techno-utopianism masked as altruism. Anonymous sources accused the Ikonomi initiative of being a social experiment with inadequate oversight. Overnight, the media storm ignited. News channels debated whether Emma was a genius or a cult leader. Influencers who had once praised the curriculum now denounced it for lacking clinical rigor. Online forums were flooded with accusations, some sincere, some clearly orchestrated. Hashtags trended. Politicians latched onto the controversy. The story became political, emotional, divisive. Emma had always known that doing something radically human in a system obsessed with numbers would come at a cost. But she hadn't expected the attack to be this coordinated or personal. Her inbox overflowed with demands for interviews, apologies, explanations. Even her team was shaken. A few junior researchers resigned, not because they lost faith in the work, but because they couldn't handle the pressure. Emma didn't blame them. The weight was heavy. But she refused to retreat. Instead, she called a community meeting in Ikonomi. Residents gathered in the story hall, anxious and confused. "This isn't just about us," Emma told them. "It's about the kind of world we're trying to build. If we believe in what we've seen here, if we know the truth of our daily lives, the healing, the connection, we can't let panic undo it." The room was silent, then slowly, one hand after another went up. A retired nurse spoke first. "Since moving here, I've stopped taking sleeping pills. I cook again. I laugh again." A teenage boy said, "This place made me want to grow up, not disappear." An elder simply said, "You saved my last years." The meeting turned into a gathering of testimony. It reminded everyone why they had chosen this life in the first place. But Emma knew narrative wasn't enough in the face of weaponized skepticism. She needed to meet the criticism head-on, with both heart and data. She assembled an independent task force of scientists, psychologists, urban planners, ethicists, and elder advocates from outside her immediate network. Their job was to audit every part of the program, from the curriculum's foundation to the app's privacy policy to the construction ethics behind Ikonomi itself. The process was painful. Every decision she'd made was questioned, dissected, sometimes misunderstood. She opened every file, shared every draft, allowed them full access. Meanwhile, Elon Musk remained uncharacteristically silent publicly. Privately, he supported Emma. "Let them dig," he told her on a late-night call. "They won't find poison because we didn't pour any in. We're not perfect, but we're honest. That will stand." Still, Emma was exhausted. Some nights, she lay awake wondering if the dream had gotten too big, if she'd missed something important in the pursuit of hope. But each morning, she returned to the community walks, the fermentation lab, the curriculum circles. She grounded herself in action. In truth. 2 months passed. Then 3. The final report from the independent task force was released in a public forum. It didn't just clear her name, it validated the entire Ikonomi model. The report praised the curriculum as an unprecedented integration of cultural health knowledge and scientific findings, supported by measurable improvements in mental, physical, and emotional well-being. It found no evidence of exploitation, manipulation, or undue influence. Privacy practices were deemed industry-leading. Most powerfully, the report concluded that while traditional metrics of longevity were useful, the lived experience of participants proved something deeper. People were not only living better, they were living fuller. The report's release changed everything. The media narrative began to shift. Former critics admitted they hadn't understood the complexity of the project. Universities reached out, offering to fund longitudinal studies. A major health journal published a special issue on the human ecology of longevity, featuring Emma's work. The political attacks faded, replaced by cautious curiosity. But Emma didn't celebrate. She took a deep breath and returned to the people. In Ikonomi, she hosted a night of remembrance, not for what they had lost, but for what they had protected. Residents shared stories of the past months, the fear, the anger, the doubts, and the daily acts that had anchored them. A child read a poem about making kimchi with his grandmother. An elderly woman shared a dream she'd had about her younger self watching her current self dance barefoot in the rain. Emma stood up at the end and said, "They tried to tell us that what we feel isn't real. That love isn't measurable. That community can't be science. But we've lived the data. We've become the proof." Afterward, as the firelight flickered and people lingered in the warm night, Emma sat quietly, sipping barley tea. She felt no triumph. Only peace. The crisis hadn't destroyed the vision. It had clarified it. She understood now that the fight wasn't just against misinformation or bureaucracy. It was against the deep fear people had of being wrong about what truly matters. People were afraid to believe that simple, human things, meals, friendship, movement, care, could be the answer. Because if they were, then everything we'd been sold about health and success might need to be rewritten. Emma was ready to rewrite it. Not with declarations or campaigns, but with stories, shared meals, and open doors. One act of love at a time. Emma had spent most of her adult life thinking about the human body, its rhythms, its resilience, its vulnerabilities. She had studied cells and systems, microbiomes and mitochondria. But only now, after economy had weathered its first real public crisis, did she feel the full gravity of what the body represented, not just biology, but memory, resistance, and possibility. The body, she realized, was both messenger and archive. And it was time to listen differently. The crisis had taught her that many people, even those living in modern societies, had been separated from their own bodies by years of stress, poor sleep, fast food, digital overwhelm, and a culture that viewed rest as laziness. People no longer trusted their instincts. They feared their cravings. They ignored their exhaustion. The body had become a machine to manage, not a home to live in. So Emma launched a new phase of the economy curriculum, a deep dive into somatic longevity. It wasn't about fitness or aesthetics. It was about learning how to re-inhabit the body as a source of wisdom and guidance. She called it the return. The pilot program paired residents with movement guides, people trained in yoga, tai chi, somatic therapy, dance, and even traditional martial arts. No one was told what to do. Instead, they were invited into practices that emphasized sensation, slowness, and curiosity. Emma insisted that sessions happen in nature whenever possible, under trees, beside the stream, on soft moss paths through the hills surrounding Economy. One of the most transformative activities was called body memory. Residents were asked to recall a moment when their body felt alive, free, powerful, joyful. Then, with the help of guides, they tried to recreate the feeling through movement, posture, breath. A woman in her 70s remembered dancing barefoot in the rain as a child, so she did it again. A man who had once been an amateur boxer found a sense of confidence again just by shadowboxing slowly in the morning light. A teenager who had struggled with anxiety discovered she could regulate her emotions through guided breathwork and gentle stretching. Emma watched these transformations quietly. People were softening, not weakening, but releasing tension held for decades. As one elder said, "My body isn't just old. It's wise. I just forgot how to hear it." Alongside the movement, Emma introduced somatic journaling. Residents recorded how different foods, conversations, weather, and emotions affected their bodies. Patterns emerged. People began to notice when sugar made them anxious or when screen time late at night disrupted their sleep. But instead of shame or rigidity, the curriculum emphasized curiosity. It wasn't about control. It was about returning to relationship, with the body as partner, not project. Elon visited during the third month of the program and joined a sunrise movement session. He was stiff, reluctant at first, but after 10 minutes of mindful walking and breath work, something shifted. Later, he admitted to Emma, "I don't think I've felt grounded in 20 years. My head's always a decade ahead of my feet." Emma smiled. "Then maybe it's time your feet led for a while." The program's impact began to show in ways even skeptics couldn't ignore. Blood pressure dropped. Sleep improved. Cortisol levels stabilized. But more than metrics, people reported feeling more at home in themselves. One mother said, "I used to think my body was something I had to fix. Now I realize it's the only thing that's never left me." Emma compiled these insights into a new guide, titled Embodied Longevity, Listening to the Body's Wisdom. It wasn't a manual, it was a companion. A mixture of stories, practices, scientific context, and cultural rituals from around the world. It became the most downloaded resource the Economy Project had ever released. Clinics, therapists, and schools integrated pieces of it into their own wellness models. A hospital in Canada created a quiet room inspired by Ikonomi's movement garden. A school in South Africa built a barefoot trail to help children connect with the earth and regulate stress. But there was still one group Emma hadn't reached yet: people with limited mobility, chronic illness, or trauma who couldn't or didn't want to participate in standard movement activities. She partnered with a group of somatic therapists and disabled activists to co-create a program specifically for them. They called it Still Bodies, Deep Rivers. It used micro-movements, visualization, and breath work to help people reconnect with their embodied selves, even in pain. One man who had been paralyzed from the waist down said, "For the first time in years, I feel like I'm not just a brain in a broken machine. I'm a whole person." Emma was moved beyond words. This was the work. Not perfection. Not performance. Presence. In response, she expanded the return curriculum to include modules for caregivers, medical professionals, and families. She wanted to seed a new kind of healthcare, one that didn't just treat symptoms, but taught people how to belong to their bodies again. Late one evening, walking back to her cottage, Emma passed by the small outdoor pavilion where a dozen residents were finishing a movement session under the moonlight. They moved in slow circles, hands raised, eyes closed. There was no music, just breath and wind and soft murmurs. It looked like a prayer, though no one had called it that. Just a return. Emma sat on a nearby bench and watched. She thought of how far they had come, from a quiet lab in Okinawa to this living, breathing community. From data to dancing. From policy to poetry. The journey hadn't been linear. It hadn't been easy. But it had been honest. As she sat there, a child joined her. Maybe 8 years old, barefoot, sleepy-eyed. "My grandma says you made this place with your heart," the child said. Emma laughed softly. "Your grandma made this place just by being here." The child thought for a moment, then nodded. "I like it when it's quiet like this. I can hear my feet." And with that, he ran off down the path, leaving behind the soft echo of bare soles on stone. Emma leaned back, looked up at the stars, and let herself rest in the silence. Her own body, tired but alive, held her gently. She had returned too. The shift was subtle at first, less a declaration and more a ripple that began to move through Ikonomi's youngest residents. It started when the older children, who had been watching their parents and grandparents immerse themselves in the longevity curriculum, began asking questions of their own. Not academic questions, but emotional ones. Why don't we learn this in school? Why do adults only talk about feelings when something is wrong? Can we have our own garden, too? Emma saw it happening in real time. The children were absorbing everything: how their elders greeted each other with intention, how meals were made slowly, how emotions were named without shame, how movement was for joy, not judgment. They mimicked rituals and remembered every detail. A girl named Ava, 8 years old, began waking up early to sweep the path outside her house, just as the elders did. A boy named Kai insisted on helping his grandfather stir the miso every morning, counting the rotations out loud like a prayer. The children had become witnesses and apprentices. Emma realized they needed something designed specifically for them, not just a child-proofed version of the adult curriculum, but something that spoke to the wisdom already alive in them. So she gathered a team of educators, artists, child psychologists, and even a few children themselves. She asked them a single question. What would a lifelong relationship with well-being look like if it started at 5 instead of 50? The result was a program called Remembering Forward. It wasn't school. It was story, movement, gardening, silence, games, food, art, and listening, all braided together like a rope made of love and dirt and laughter. The guiding philosophy was simple: children already know. We help them remember. Each module invited children to explore one aspect of embodied living through curiosity, not instruction. They made maps of their emotions using colors and textures. They wrote letters to their future selves and planted them with seeds in the soil. They practiced silence, not as punishment, but as a game. "Let's see how quietly we can listen to the wind," one facilitator whispered, and for the next 5 minutes, an entire group of 6-year-olds sat still under a persimmon tree, eyes closed, breathing in the rustle of leaves. Emma watched as they transformed, not into mini-adults, but into more deeply themselves. Their joy wasn't frantic. Their play had purpose. They weren't being trained to compete, perform, or excel. They were being invited to feel, to relate, to notice. Parents began to report changes at home. Fewer tantrums. More curiosity about cooking and chores. Children started asking to light candles before dinner, to name what they were grateful for, to tell the stories of their food. A 5-year-old asked his dad why he always looked at his phone during breakfast. A 7-year-old told her mom she felt a storm in her belly, instead of just saying, "I'm mad." These weren't small changes. They were seismic. Because once a child learns to listen to their body, trust their feelings, and respect others, everything changes. Emma saw this and knew, longevity was no longer about just living long. It was about remembering early. The program expanded quickly. Neighborhood wonder circles popped up, where groups of children gathered weekly to garden, sing, cook, and talk. Local artists created illustrated books based on the curriculum, titles like Where My Feelings Sleep, The Rice Knows My Name, and Grandma's Breath is Medicine. The books were beautiful, simple, profound, full of sensory language and cultural references that made children feel rooted, not generalized. Schools took notice. A Montessori-style elementary near Osaka integrated Remembering Forward into their weekly rhythm. A bilingual preschool in California reached out to translate the materials. In Norway, a forest school created an entire semester around the curriculum, calling it the listening season. But the most powerful moment came when the children of Ikonomi invited their elders to join them for a ritual they had designed themselves. They called it the Day of Firsts. On that day, every child in the city picked one elder and asked them to do something for the first time: paint a picture, climb a small hill, taste a new fruit, dance under the stars. The elders were nervous at first, but they agreed. What followed was unlike anything Emma had seen. An 87-year-old man painted a butterfly for the first time since he was a boy. A 92-year-old woman learned to say, "I love you," in sign language. A 100-year-old farmer tasted his first mango. A 96-year-old great-grandmother danced in the moonlight with her great-granddaughter, giggling like a child herself. It wasn't about performance. It was about permission. The children had reminded the elders that firsts didn't end at childhood, and the elders, in turn, showed the children that courage never expires. That evening, Emma stood by the community fire pit as the children told stories of the day's firsts, and the elders shared how it felt to be beginners again. The fire crackled softly, casting warm shadows on the circle of faces, both young and ancient. Emma felt a swell of emotion. This was it. This was the bridge. The present teaching the past. The future remembering the now. That night, she wrote in her journal, "If we teach the children to listen, they will become the protectors of memory. And if we protect their memory, they will grow up knowing the truth, that life is not a ladder to climb, but a circle to tend." From then on, every curriculum, every project, every idea in Ikonomi included a question: what would this look like if we started it at 5? It changed everything. It made everything softer, kinder, more honest. And the children, they kept remembering. Forward. By the time the first spring rains fell in Ikonomi that year, something extraordinary had begun to happen, not just in its people, but in the land itself. What had once been a carefully planned community for longevity was starting to behave like a living organism. It adapted, responded, and pulsed with its own rhythms. Emma stood on the rooftop garden of the fermentation center one morning, looking out over the city. She noticed how the roofs shimmered with morning dew, how the residents moved slowly in harmony with each other, how the trees lining the pathways swayed like a choir. It was a sensation more than a fact. The city wasn't just inhabited. It was breathing. The idea struck her so vividly that she whispered it aloud, "The city breathes." That whisper became the theme for a new phase of the project. If economy was a living entity, what did it need to thrive? What could its lungs be? Its heartbeat? What were its natural rhythms, and how could the built environment support, not suppress, those patterns? Emma brought together a team of urban ecologists, architects, traditional builders, and local craftspeople. They walked through economy as if diagnosing a patient, not to find flaws, but to learn its natural language. They observed the movement of wind, the heat of different surfaces, how light hit buildings at various hours. They listened to where sound gathered and where silence was thickest. Then they did something radical, they let the city redesign itself. Rather than top-down construction projects, they initiated a method they called urban listening. Residents were given space and resources to propose micro-changes based on their sensory experience of the environment. A group of teenagers created bamboo wind corridors through the narrow alleys to help circulate cool air in summer. Elders suggested adding stone benches near the plum trees where the late-day sun lingered. Gardeners requested changes in the irrigation schedule based on how the soil smelled at dawn. Artisans repainted walls in natural pigments to better reflect the changes in season. Someone even suggested quiet hours, not for noise regulation, but so that each day had a moment of acoustic rest. Within months, the city changed, not in layout, but in texture. Everything moved softer, slower, more like breath. People began referring to time not in hours, but in feelings. "I'll meet you after the blue light hour," or "Let's talk during the cinnamon breeze." Emma was stunned by how quickly this shift spread. Other cities took notice. A delegation from Amsterdam arrived, curious to learn how environmental sensory design could influence community wellness. They walked through economy in silence for an entire day, then simply said, "This feels like walking inside someone's memory." But the most astonishing result wasn't how the city felt, it was how it responded. During a particularly hot summer week, the entire population adjusted without any official guidance. Morning activities began earlier. Shared meals moved outdoors under shaded grapevines. Children napped in hammocks strung between willow trees. Even the tech labs operated at night to reduce cooling strain. It wasn't coordination. It was coherence. Like cells responding to the same internal signal. One evening, a young girl fell ill suddenly with a rare respiratory infection. She was rushed to the local clinic, where a doctor immediately recognized the symptoms, something he'd seen only once, decades ago. Within 2 hours, the community had responded. People who had trained in the herbal medicine module brought steaming infusions of mulberry leaf and ginger. The streetlights were dimmed to help her rest. A group of residents gathered outside the clinic, not in panic but in quiet vigil, humming songs passed down from their grandparents. She recovered within a week. No fanfare. Just breath. Emma realized this was the result of years of small choices, teaching presence, building trust, creating space for feeling. It wasn't just policy that made economy work. It was attention. When people paid attention, to their bodies, their neighbors, their environment, they moved differently. They became attuned. She began writing a paper titled The Somatic City, When Architecture and Emotion Align. In it, she argued that our cities had become too cognitive, too mechanical. We designed for traffic, not touch. For speed, not sensation. She proposed a new model, the feeling city. Not to replace infrastructure, but to root it in the sensory intelligence of its inhabitants. The paper was published widely, stirring debate in planning circles. Some called it idealistic. Others saw it as the future of urban survival. Climate change, aging populations, mental health epidemics, these weren't just technical problems. They were symptoms of disconnection. A city that breathes could help us remember how to survive together. Inspired by the feedback, Emma and her team created a toolkit for other communities called The Breath of Place. It included exercises in sensory mapping, seasonal design thinking, and community-led adaptation. It encouraged cities to think not in blueprints, but in cycles. To design for pause. To build for conversation. To plan for breath. As other towns began to experiment, stories poured in. A village in Portugal redesigned its market square to include a daily listening hour. A city in South Korea created a shade map that guided outdoor activities through the hottest months. A neighborhood in Brazil painted sidewalks with quotes from local elders, turning each walk into a quiet story. But no one went as far as a coastal town in New Zealand, where the entire community agreed to cut electricity for 1 hour each evening. During that time, families lit candles, ate meals in silence, or simply stood outside watching the sea. Their local paper dubbed it the breath hour. Emma traveled there a year later. She stood on the bluff overlooking the ocean just before the appointed time. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the lights across the town flickered out one by one, like stars exhaling. She cried. Not because it was dramatic. But because it was so human. Later, walking through the darkened streets, she heard laughter, footsteps, silence. She felt the city. And it was breathing. Emma stood in front of the mirror and didn't recognize the woman staring back. Not because age had finally found her, though the fine lines had deepened, the silver had begun threading its way more boldly through her hair, but because the person reflected there felt like someone she hadn't met before. She wasn't afraid of the change. It was the recognition of something even more profound. She had become someone she never set out to be. For years she had defined herself by the mission, the movement, the relentless pursuit of something better. But now, as economy matured into its own organic pulse and her work spread across oceans and cultures, she found herself no longer at the center. She had become the echo, not the origin. That morning she had woken up without an alarm, brewed barley tea without thinking, and watched the sunrise from her porch for the first time in weeks. She didn't check her messages. She didn't plan her day. She just sat. And in that silence, she felt the tremble of something long buried. Not grief. Not fear. But displacement. Who was she without the fight? Without the forward motion? Without the next innovation? The mirror didn't answer. It simply held her gaze, asking her to stay. That same day, a visitor arrived in Ikonomi. Not a journalist, not a researcher, not a politician. A woman named Ruth. 78 years old. From Kansas. She arrived alone, wheeling a small suitcase, wearing a wide straw hat and carrying a notebook full of handwritten letters. She walked straight to Emma's door without hesitation. "I need to speak to the one who started all this," she said, her voice calm, sturdy. Emma welcomed her in, made tea, listened. Ruth explained that her husband had passed 2 years earlier. She'd read about Ikonomi in a health magazine at her doctor's office. She'd spent the next year reading everything Emma had ever written, watching every interview, transcribing entire talks into her notebooks. "I didn't come here to move in," Ruth said. "I came to return something you lost." Emma raised an eyebrow. Ruth pulled out one of her letters and read aloud. It was one of Emma's early pieces, raw, unfinished, full of fire and hope. A vision scrawled out during her fellowship years, where she had written about the fear of forgetting who we are when we chase the world's approval. "I think you forgot," Ruth said, gently. "Not your purpose. But your pulse." Emma was stunned. No one had spoken to her like this in years. Not even herself. She didn't cry, but she sat very still, letting the words settle in. That night, Emma walked through the streets of Ikonomi like a stranger. She noticed how much she had given, and how much of herself she'd slowly put aside in the process. She had built something beautiful, yes. But somewhere along the way, she had stopped dancing. Stopped sketching. Stopped writing for no one. Ruth stayed for 2 weeks. During that time, she and Emma took long walks, cooked simple meals, and shared stories, not about achievements, but about longings. Ruth told her about the music she used to play before arthritis found her hands. Emma confessed that she used to write poetry in secret before the expectations of being a public intellectual made her feel silly for it. "We all get famous for something," Ruth said. "But sometimes we forget to stay close to the things that never asked us to be known." That line stayed with Emma long after Ruth returned to Kansas. In the weeks that followed, Emma began to live differently. She didn't change the city or write a new paper. She simply began to listen more deeply to herself. She took entire days off, not to rest for work, but to rest from being useful. She wandered into art classes taught by residents, painted poorly, and laughed. She began journaling again, not for data, but for memory. She took photographs of shadows, not for documentation, but for beauty. And slowly, the stranger in the mirror became a friend. This phase of her life wasn't about innovation or expansion. It was about integration. About letting her own body and story become part of the longevity she had spent her life studying. She started a small evening circle in her home called the Unrushed Hour. No agenda, no structure. Just tea, silence, stories, sometimes music. Anyone could come. They did. Young and old. Residents and visitors. They brought nothing but their presence. One night, a woman stood up and sang a lullaby she hadn't sung since her child died 20 years ago. Another night, a boy asked if he could just sit quietly because he felt weird today. No one fixed anything. They just stayed. That space, Emma realized, was the purest thing she had ever created. A place where no one had to be exceptional, just human. That spring, Elon Musk visited again. He walked with Emma through the orchard, asking fewer questions than usual. "I read about Ruth," he said. Emma nodded. "She reminded me I'm more than what I build." Elon smiled, rare and soft. "Funny, isn't it? I've built rockets. AI. Underground cities. But the scariest thing I've ever tried is resting." They sat under a plum tree, neither speaking for a long time. When Elon finally stood to leave, he turned and asked, "What do you want now?" Emma thought for a moment. "To live long enough to forget why I was ever afraid." He nodded. "That's a good reason to live." That summer, Emma returned to Okinawa for the first time in years. She visited the village where her research had begun. She found the home of the 102-year-old woman who once told her, "Live like your ancestors are watching." The woman had passed. But her great-granddaughter welcomed Emma, served her tea, and said, "My grandma used to say you'd come back, once you understood." Emma smiled. She finally did. And the mirror smiled back. The morning mist still clung to the fields when Emma arrived at the community seed bank, a modest wooden shed tucked between rows of carefully tended vegetables and herbs. It was a quiet place, but bursting with life. The walls held jars filled with ancient grains, beans, and wildflower seeds, each one a living memory of generations past. Emma had helped establish the seed bank 5 years earlier, but today, as she stepped inside, it felt more sacred than ever. She was greeted by Yuto, a young farmer whose family had been tending the land around Ikonomi for centuries. Yuto's hands were stained with soil, his eyes bright with the same fierce hope Emma had seen in so many who devoted themselves to nurturing life. "We're ready for planting season," he said, pulling out small packets of seeds labeled in both Japanese and English. "But this year feels different. People want to plant more than food." Emma nodded, understanding immediately. The seed bank wasn't just about crops, it was about culture, connection, and continuity. She thought back to the earliest days of the project, when survival had seemed fragile, and hope was a whispered prayer. Now, hope had become something you could hold in your hand, a small, fragile seed waiting to grow. That afternoon, Emma joined a group of residents gathered under the old camphor tree at the center of town. The seed keepers, as they called themselves, shared stories of plants their grandparents had cultivated, plants thought lost, now resurrected through careful preservation. There were wild yams that grew in hidden mountain groves, herbs used to treat ailments, and rice varieties with flavors so distinct they told stories of place and history. One elderly woman, Mrs. Cato, brought out a handful of tiny black seeds. "These," she said softly, "are from the rice my mother used to grow. It fed us through war and peace alike." She passed the seeds to Emma, who held them reverently. "What will you do with these?" Emma asked. "Plant them, nurture them, pass them on," Mrs. Cato replied. "Just like life." It was a moment that crystallized the essence of Ikonomi's journey, the understanding that longevity was a collective act, a chain of hands passing from one generation to the next. But the seed bank wasn't just about preservation, it was about innovation. Yuto explained how he and other farmers were experimenting with regenerative agriculture techniques, blending ancient wisdom with modern science. They used cover crops to enrich the soil, compost tea to boost nutrients, and companion planting to reduce pests naturally. These methods didn't just increase yields, they healed the earth. Emma realized this was the missing piece in so many conversations about longevity. It wasn't just about individual health or even community care. It was about the health of the land beneath their feet. Without fertile soil, clean water, and biodiverse ecosystems, no one would thrive. As the sun dipped low, the seed keepers gathered their tools and walked to a newly cleared plot on the outskirts of town. They planted the ancient rice first, their hands careful and steady. Emma watched as Yuto gently covered the seeds with soil, whispering a prayer she didn't understand but felt deep in her chest. Around her, the community worked together in silence, connected by something older than words. Afterward, they sat around a fire, sharing a meal cooked from the season's first harvest. The air was thick with the scent of grilled sweet potatoes and miso soup. Emma listened as stories flowed, stories of survival, loss, joy, and resilience. A young woman spoke of how she'd found her way back to farming after years in the city. An older man told of his father teaching him to read the weather in the clouds. A child recited a poem about the moon and the rice fields. It was a tapestry of memory and possibility. Emma knew then that the true seed they were planting was not just for food, but for identity. For belonging. For a future rooted in reverence for the past. The next morning, Emma visited a school where children were learning to plant their own gardens. She knelt beside a small boy who was carefully pressing seeds into the earth. "What are you planting?" she asked. He looked up, eyes wide with wonder. "Tomorrow." She smiled, understanding perfectly. In that moment, she knew that Ikonomi's greatest legacy wasn't the programs or policies. It was the simple, powerful act of planting seeds and trusting that life would find a way to grow. That no matter what storms came, the future could always be rooted in care. Emma sat quietly in the sun-dappled room of the old community center, surrounded by faces both familiar and new. The long conversation was a tradition she had helped initiate, a gathering where residents of all ages came together to share stories, fears, hopes, and memories without interruption or judgment. Today's theme was time, how it shaped them, and how they wished to shape it in return. The circle was a mosaic of generations, a retired schoolteacher who spoke of the war years, a teenager dreaming of becoming an artist, a mother balancing work and care for her aging parents. Emma listened deeply as voices wove together in a tapestry of lived experience. One woman, Mrs. Tanaka, shared how she had lost her husband 2 years ago but found comfort in the garden they had tended together. "Every flower reminds me that time is a circle, not a line," she said softly. A young man named Kenji spoke next. He described the pressure of the modern world, the relentless pace, the noise, the feeling of being pulled in too many directions. "Sometimes I feel like time is a cage," he confessed. Emma nodded, recognizing the tension between the old rhythms of nature and the demands of technology and globalization. She reminded the group that this conversation itself was an act of reclaiming time. Here, They weren't rushed, judged, or distracted. They were present. The dialogue turned to memory, what was worth holding on to, and what could be released. An elder shared a story of a sacred ritual where the community would gather to light lanterns for the departed, releasing their light into the sky as a symbol of remembrance and renewal. Inspired, Emma proposed a new ritual, a communal time tree, where people could tie notes with memories, dreams, and lessons onto its branches. Over the next weeks, the time tree became a focal point in Ikonomi. Residents wrote messages like, "Remember to slow down, dream of a kinder world, and live with gratitude." Children decorated the tree with origami cranes, each symbolizing hope and peace. Emma watched as this simple act sparked reflection and connection. It was a tangible reminder that time was not just measured by clocks, but by meaning. One evening, during the annual festival, Emma found herself beside an elderly man named Hiroshi. He was a quiet man who rarely spoke, but that night he shared something that stayed with her. "We often think of time as something to conquer or escape," he said. "But maybe it's something to listen to, a long conversation with ourselves and each other." The festival lights flickered around them, laughter and music filling the air. Emma felt a profound sense of peace. The city was not just a place of innovation and longevity, it was becoming a community rooted in wisdom, presence, and care. That night, Emma returned home and wrote in her journal about the long conversation. She reflected on how our relationship with time shapes everything, from health to happiness, from connection to creativity. She realized that the longest life isn't just measured in years, but in depth, the depth of our conversations, relationships, and moments of presence. The long conversation was a gift, a practice that could heal disconnection and cultivate belonging. It reminded her of Ruth's words. "We forget our pulse when we forget to listen." Emma smiled, feeling the steady rhythm of life, quiet, enduring, and ever unfolding. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?